the Teaching Tax Flow podcast, where the goal is to empower and educate you to legally and ethically minimize taxes paid over your lifetime.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast, episode 80 today. We are going to jump into that pesky little thing we call payroll. And why it's really not that pesky, because we got an answer for you with a great guest. But as always, let's take a brief moment and thank our sponsor on this episode.
This podcast is sponsored by The Mortgage Shop. Are you looking to qualify for an investment credit loan without jumping through hoops? That's easy. They have loans with LTV up to 89.99%. Exploring their products and discovering how they can work for you is simple. Just visit mortgage.shop or call 865-325-2566 and tell them TTF sent you.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Teaching Tax Flow podcast. As you likely seen in the intro or took the time to actually read the show notes, you know what we're going to talk about here. So before we introduce our guest, and I know for a fact that this is a great topic because I was actually asked about regarding this morning in the lobby area of a Starbucks. So I'll bring up the questions that the guy asked me here shortly. But as always, Chris Pacura, welcome back to your own show, sir. How you doing today?
Thank you, Johnny T. It's always a pleasure to be back to my own show. And our show, John, remember, it's our show. It is our show, but I am so excited about our guest today and our private CPA practice. We don't talk about it too much on this podcast, but has partnered with Gusto for payroll processing successfully on tons and tons of clients. Payroll can be an intimidating thing. And payroll really applies to not just big business owners. In fact, it's more challenging for that solopreneur. So we're going to talk about payroll processing today. We're also going to tie it into some really cool tax strategies that circle around that. And we're going to have a great conversation with our friends at Gusto. And they're going to make this sound very easy. It's not easy. But one of the reasons, I'm just going to speak from personal experience. We in our CPA practice, private CPA practice, we used to process about 100 payrolls. This is when I was young and dumb. And we started with the software called PayCycle way back in the day. They're like the first ones to be online. They got bought out by Intuit Payroll, I believe, Intuit Online Payroll, IOP. And it was just kind of a difficult task with holdings. And it was really, the best way I could describe it is the process was super clunky. So about, I want to say 7 years ago, John, you and I go to a big conference every summer. We spend more time in the vendor hall, actually. And I talked to every payroll processor there. This was the IRS Nationwide Tax Forum. I believe it was in Atlanta at that point. And I was very impressed with Gusto. It was the least amount of clicks possible to successfully run a payroll. So I'm honored to have these guys as a partner really in our private CPA practice, but as a guest on the podcast. So thank you guys. And John, take it from here.
And so we had a discussion with Gusto, and that was my first interaction with them probably about a month ago. And I was super impressed, and I'm hard to impress. I will say that I'm a very difficult customer with everything, but these guys are awesome. And without further ado, Will Lopez from Gusto. How you doing today, Will?
Hey, doing well. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely, man. And honestly, a couple of the things that really stand out from our first conversation, and this is coming from somebody, as I always like to put the disclaimer out there. I am not a tax guy. I'm a business owner. Chris is the tax guy. If I ever try to give anybody tax advice, don't listen to it. Just fact check me on Teaching Tax Flow. So, Will, you had mentioned a couple things, again, that really stood out. And y'all's approach to payroll is not really as cut and dry, maybe, as some people think, like, oh, you just input and output, that's it, it's done. You guys really approach this in a sense that you really focus on payroll is culture within an organization. Is that said correctly?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, when you think about just the history of payroll, people approach it in the mindset of it's a way to pay your employees, and that's all it is. That is, they just kind of default it as an exchange of money. Hey, you provided me a service, I owe you a paycheck in return. But it really is a reflection of society, in my opinion, when you think about what goes on with payroll. Careers are built through payroll. Retirement is achieved through payroll. The economy flows through payroll. Communities are actually upheld through payroll because, those who receive a paycheck, they're able to take care of their family. They get benefits through a paycheck. All those things are taken care of through a paycheck. They're able to take care of their immediate families, the communities around them. So, it's a lot higher than I think what we've given it credit for the last 100 years or so. When you think about a paycheck, it's always been looked at as just like a way to compensate labor, but it really is, in my opinion, kind of a true reflection of the value of an individual when they're working. And everything that individual needs in order to work, to live, to be taken care of.
I'll ask a couple more things here that we could touch on. I know that you mentioned, and then I'm going to release the tax animal, right? We'll let Chris really chime in here. There we go. We'll let him out of the cage, and it's, all the tax knowledge is all going to come out at you. In saying that too, which I really want to reiterate with everybody too, it's almost, if we as business owners are paying those who do work for our organization, right? So we see the value in them every day, every hour, hopefully every minute, unless they're hanging around the water cooler or the minibar too much. But, because they're providing something ongoing to the business, where to them as an employee, contractor, in cases which we'll get to, right, a lot of their, we won't say payback, is really, like you mentioned, it's really reliant on the time when they are quote unquote paid for their services. So I can only imagine, right? Luckily I've never been in a situation where, a payroll system within an organization is just completely broken and you're sitting there, you're like, oh, maybe I'll get paid today. Maybe I won't. I don't know if it's going to be the right amount. What's it look like? What's the user experience? Is there an app? Is there all these features? So I absolutely love that you guys put that, it really is an organizational culture for yourselves, but that also into the product and service that you guys offer. So I really appreciate you going into detail on that. And then obviously through Gusto. So if you can, before we get too deep in, maybe tell us a little bit more about yourself and about Gusto, really, maybe even how you ended up there, right? Because you have a background in tax, obviously, and now you're at a payroll company. So we'd love to hear that. And then obviously, as I mentioned, let's talk a little bit about Gusto. So what you guys offer.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'll give the 60 seconds on me. So I'm head of their customer mission, also serve as chief ambassador at Gusto. Started at Gusto 5 years ago, came in to create People Advisory powered by Gusto, which is a new consulting service for the accounting profession, not only here in the States, but also globally. We built programs around it, education around it. We built community around Gusto for the accountants that partner with us. And so that's been my MO the whole time. But to your point, I'm actually just an accountant by trade. So I have a bachelor's degree in accounting, master's degree in accounting, CPA license in Florida. I ran a firm for 9 years. I served small businesses all across the United States. By the end of my practice life, we served clients in over 42 states, 3 continents. Thank God for the cloud. And
I like you said, I'm just an accountant.
Yeah, I'm just an accountant. But, overall, I love entrepreneurship. I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. Both my parents had businesses all their entire lives. I saw them struggle. I saw them succeed. I think business is the ultimate adventure, in my opinion. I joke around and say, I was the kid in the never-ending story. Instead of being enthralled with fantasy worlds, I was actually really enthralled with my parents' stories about business life. I always knew I was going to get into business or somehow serve business or businesses and entrepreneurs. I just never knew accounting would actually turn it on for me. So when I was back in my practice life, we ran a fully remote online-based practice. This was back before it got hot. This was, 2011, 2012. I saw the entire cloud being built at the time. I built software back in 12 that integrated into Xero. We had software where all our clients joined on our platform and kind of joined us in managing their own accounting services. But yeah, we offered, advisory, tax planning. I firmly believe, that small businesses are not just the backbone of the economy. They are the economy. And so I was a small business owner myself. I had employees myself. And so all of that just kind of work and being on the front lines led me to Gusto. Gusto wanted to make major investments into accountants, into the accounting profession, way above and beyond my competitors. And I have no problem throwing shade over them. They've been around for a long time. I don't know what they're up to, because at the end of the day, the only thing that's really happened with payroll, it's gone from like rock, hammer, chisel to desktop to the cloud. And all, so it's gotten easier, and Gusto has made that incredible. But payroll companies have never really come around and thought differently for small businesses, have thought differently for accountants, and actually pave a way for that kind of stuff. So, I'm proud to say that Gusto's made tremendous strides with those who run a company and have to pay their teams, whether they're subcontractors or employees, and those who are running accounting practices and need to serve their clients and want to keep their practice very modern, or they want to continuously grow through payroll. So all of these things, we've been able to achieve in strides in such a short amount of time. It's been amazing what our team's been up to in the past 4 or 5 years. So we keep we keep getting accredited for what's next for payroll, both from owning a business and paying your team all the way to an accounting firm actually servicing and trying to support their clients through payroll, benefits, and HR.
And in full transparency, when I first got on a call with you and your team members here, again, probably about a month or so ago, I think I may have told Chris before that. I'm like, oh, okay, great, payroll guys, how wonderful. I probably had like and you have, honestly, even just, you've taken something, and again, this is coming directly from a business owner's mouth who dreaded payroll as a whole, right? Because it's something that you have to do. You don't want to mess it up because it makes you look bad, obviously. But then, it's just not, it's not something you see as creative. You guys have made it so simple, and this sounds like an absolute sales pitch. It's not. I promise we'll make it easy. We'll put a link in the show notes. You can see for yourself. You guys ask like 4 questions, and it delivers really 3 or 4 questions, and really it delivers a suggested product for somebody. So we won't go into detail on it all, but I know Chris is just etching to start talking about how to use payroll and taxes. He's itching.
Well, I want to say something. We talk in our practice, when I'm always looking for, and I learned when I was very young, was that someone intelligent makes something very complicated and can explain it to you very simply. And that's what Gusto really does with payroll. Not that this is a commercial for Gusto. Vice versa. Someone that you want to not deal with is someone that could, and we've been there with clients and customers, someone that could take something very simple and complicate the heck out of it is not someone that you want to spend too much time with, because you're going to spin your wheels. So that's the one, that's not the only thing. That's to me, the biggest takeaway. Payroll is a huge responsibility. When we look at the entire amount of federal tax that it's collected, a huge percentage goes through payroll via federal tax withholding, Social Security, Medicare. Really, it's, as we talk about the entrepreneurs, the backbone of the country, that's the backbone of our federal tax system. All of the responsibility falls on the employer to collect and remit that tax, both at the federal, state, and local level. And that's very, very intimidating for people that have never processed payroll before. I concern myself with, people that are processing payroll not in a modern environment, not in the cloud, that are printing out paychecks and signing them and handing them out and having their payroll software on some type of desktop. Not only is that a very big concern for data security, but it's also a concern. I can't tell you how many times it's happened where the employer goes out of business, the employee can't get a W-2, and then, man, how valuable was it to be processing payroll in a modern way when the pandemic hit, when we had PPP, ERTC? If you didn't have those things in place, you were cooked. So to have that system set up was huge. So no matter what payroll, if you're processing payroll, I strongly encourage you to make sure that you are processing it using some type of modern system that's cloud-based.
Yeah, and to your point, Chris, when you think about payroll, Gusto has made it incredibly easy, but the concepts are incredibly difficult, right? And so, I think people approach payroll saying, well, because the concepts are totally difficult, Therefore, my processes should be really difficult. And that really shouldn't be the case. And I think like when I think about other solutions, I feel like, the accounting industry loves to just kind of liken the product experience with the complication of the code or the complication of the administrative processes. That shouldn't be the case. We should acknowledge that things are very difficult and then find ways and make strides towards making those very complicated concepts come to life a lot easier. Because there's just no need to complicate your life even further, especially when you're running a business.
Absolutely. We have someone, real story in our private CPA practice. He's been a client for a few years. He came to us during the pandemic, and he owns a pretty decent-sized painting contracting business in Florida. He has tax notices. He was with a different payroll processing company that even though this is a large national organization, still mailed him 941s to sign and mail in. 941s, for those listening, are quarterly federal payroll forms that reconcile your withholding with your wages. Well, he's a painting contractor. He didn't mail them in because and now he's getting some serious IRS notices, failure to file penalties, because that wasn't filed electronically. And he will spend about $4,000 in fees to with someone that helps with IRS resolutions to alleviate him. He doesn't owe this money, but it's a disaster for this gentleman. And ultimately, yes, he could have opened his mail and mailed it in, but again, it was an archaic system, even though this is a large company. So my point is, like I said, make sure you're working with a modern payroll company. But let's tie in a couple really cool strategies with teaching tax flow, because a lot of people in our community want to partake in tax planning. In the secret sauce, because a lot of times people say, well, man, you guys, you give out almost all your content for free, and we're putting out daily content. But the thing is, like, you shouldn't charge for the content. It's the implementation that's the secret sauce. How do you implement what we're talking about? So some of the strategies I want to talk through with you guys, maybe not John. John's just there to look pretty, but Will. Talk about a couple strategies. One of which that's very popular with business owners is the strategy of income shifting to a related family member. Now that could be putting a spouse on payroll. Let's say if you're tying that in with an S corp election and implementing a Section 105 plan. And what that means to the listeners is that you can take your medical expenses that are out of pocket, that are typically non-deductible, and make them an employee benefit. Or you might be paying a child as long as they're doing legitimate work for the business, and shifting that taxable income out of a high marginal tax rate into a lower marginal tax rate. So, Will, can you kind of just touch on, what the lead time would be for someone that wants to hire a child? And I know there's maybe some special rules if let's say you're self-employed or a single member LLC in respects to Social Security, and then also maybe another example of someone that elects to be an S corporation and how they, could process monthly payroll.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't know, income shifting, right, also known as like income splitting, is like a tax planning technique. It's a strategy that kind of transfers income from like this high tax bracket to a lower tax bracket for you, the individual, the taxpayer, the business owner, stuff like that. It's also used to like reduce the overall tax burden by moving income from, one of the higher tax brackets to a lower tax bracket. When I was back in practice, and I'll speak, there's a lot of ways to income shift. Like you said, you pointed out, like family members, putting them on payroll, things like that. And of course, there's guidelines to all of that. The Internal Revenue Service wants you to do that correctly, right? Paying a family member who's not doing work for the business is not a great tax strategy, especially if the IRS finds out. But I used to do a lot of work when I was back in practice on S corps. So I would run into a tremendous amount of solopreneurs that had LLCs set up because that's what they Googled. And they were like, okay, I need a LLC because I guess it limits my liability, right? But they didn't think about the tax side of things. And so I kind of liken like the S corp opportunity to my clients as like driving a BMW. You can have a specific BMW, but the interior can be really different. And so that's how it is. Let's say if you're a solopreneur owning an LLC, is according to the IRS, there's like 3-4 ways to tax your BMW, your LLC. And S Corp is generally the most, so long as you qualify for a variety of things, but generally the most tax advantageous, because a lot of the additional taxes that you get hit with, Social Security, Medicare, those things actually only apply to the paycheck. And so you have to run a reasonable salary, and then anything above and beyond the paycheck that's net income only gets taxed federal income, state-wise, federally. So, we used to save $10, $20, $30, $40, $50,000 a year for our clients who went the S Corp route. And then, of course, going S Corp just requires a little more administrative duty, right? Now you have to file a separate tax return. It's no longer on your Schedule C. So you have to file your 1120S's. You have to actually get payroll set up. And that's what's really exciting is like you could save a tremendous amount of money and then actually start forming your own business in such a way where you can take advantage of medical deductions, and you can start taking advantage of maybe setting up a solo 401k or something like that. And so it really allows you to manage your tax bracket greatly. And so I'll share a quick story. Has anybody heard of Sasquatch, the soap? Okay. John's shaking his head. Yeah. So I actually started their business. They were actually they came to me. It was 3 founders, 3 young guys. And I managed their account for about 6-7 years, right when they were blowing up. Now you can find them in like Target and Costco and all this kind of stuff. But at that point they were,
and I say that I know what they are, not just because I look like the furry guy from the woods. Let's be honest here. Let's put that disclaimer.
And their marketing is incredible. I mean, I'm so proud of those guys, but I helped them start their business. And at some point they went from a loss on their income to a gain, great net income bottom line. And at that point we shifted them over to an S Corp. So all that to say is there's a variety of ways to income shift, to get yourself from a higher bracket to a lower bracket. And there's a lot of strategies to implement. I'm sure you guys really help your clients do that, or even prospective clients consider that. But yeah, that through Gusto, I used to use Gusto for my own clients and used to do all my tax planning through Payroll. So we offered quarterly tax planning, real time for our monthly clients, and we would adjust their payments that were forecasted out for the year. And our margin of error was like less than 1% as far as like what actually came on tax time. So, there's a lot of cool strategies that you could do. Payroll definitely is at the center of a lot of it. Not only does it pay you, but you could leverage payroll, benefits, HR, those things as ways to income shift. So high utility, a lot of function within payroll.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we run into here in the state of Tennessee. We're having kind of in the middle of an overhaul of our franchise and excise tax. We had a law passed, the Tennessee Works Act, that passed last year, and we have another potential law change. So Tennessee is a little quirky with the S Corps, but I would agree, for a profitable business, the S Corp is an amazing strategy. So if you're listening to this, don't go to TikTok. You can go to TikTok and learn a dance or something, but don't go to TikTok to your tax advice, unless you go to the Teaching Tax Flow TikTok account, of course. But I want you to think about it. If you have net income of over $150,000 or more and you're self-employed or a single member LLC taxed as someone that's a disregarded entity, don't just jump into an S Corp. Let us know, and we could take a look and see if it makes sense, because what Will said is very important. We have to determine something called a reasonable compensation, and it can't be zero. So we have, within Teaching Tax Flow, some great resources so we can calculate your reasonable compensation using IRS compliance software. And then now you're talking about potentially an amazing tax planning strategy. So S Corps definitely makes sense if in the right situation. Unfortunately, we see them for people put rental properties in S Corps. This is a whole nother episode that we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. If you're listening to this and you're self-employed and you have a lot of medical expenses that you're not getting a deduction for, so that could be beyond your health insurance, and you've done your HSA, but let's say you have someone in the home that has special needs, or you have you could even have a parent that's a dependent, a child that's a dependent that has a lot of medical expenses. That's where you might want to think about changing to that S corp. Because remember, if you're on payroll, then you're an employee and you would be eligible for employee benefits. So that's really where it comes into play. Again, there are some rules and things that we need to work through because you might have other employees. So if you have high medical expenses, you're not getting a deduction for. Self-employed over $150,000 worth of net income, those are the lowest hanging fruit for the S corp election. Or as far as the income shifting or income splitting, if you run a business and you have someone in the household, in the family, that's really helping you out with the business and not formally paying them as a business expense, that's where you might want to employ them and don't be intimidated. Processing payroll is only a few clicks away. So it is something as long, that can be intimidating. You've got to register for state and federal unemployment and that sort of stuff, but the software will take you right through. And then one thing that Gusto has done that I'm really impressed with is, because I advocate for you guys with other accountants too, is that they allow you and your accounting firm or even teaching tax flow access to you can share your information so that they can see the payroll and maybe troubleshoot if you do run into a little bit of a problem above customer service. So that's a nice, like for our private CPA practice and teaching tax law, we have a dashboard. We can see what's going on with client payroll. So
what I'll add to that is what's really cool about today is, 10 years ago, the ability to, income shift easily was very difficult. Because I ran a practice and providing those kind of tax strategies and that tax advice and then executing on it was generally difficult. So if you're in business right now, that's the reason why you would want to work with a professional, is because to achieve these things requires not just advice and guidance. It also requires great solutions to manage at scale or to manage in general, because a lot of like you said, payroll, benefits, HR, very technical concepts. So is tax planning, very technical concepts. So is income shifting, very technical concepts. So you basically work with a pro that has a suite of solutions that can execute all those things. So, the beauty of Gusto is Gusto, of course, can allow you to achieve all your tax strategies through the platform and achieve them very well. And we do the compliance aspects of achieving those tax strategies, like making sure your payroll's compliant or all the tax forms being automated and filed for you, so that way you don't get hit with penalties, interest, and all that kind of stuff. And then on top of all that is Gusto as a solution, not only does what all the other solutions do, but much better as far as like automating compliance. But we also help you become a great employer. And that's also a great thing. That is, like, you run a business, you want to save money, but if you're running a team as well, or if you're a solopreneur, like, you want to give yourself or make yourself look good as an employer, especially if you're growing a team. And Gusto allows you to also achieve that. So you're killing a lot of different birds with one stone. And that's more realizable today than I have ever seen. And I've been in the industry since 2000, 2001. So I don't want to date myself, but it's incredible what you can do now. And, achieve these tax strategies, look like a great employer, run an awesome team, make that team feel very supported, achieve the goals of like being a great employer. Like, I want to take care of my team. I want them to go home and sleep on the pillow at night and not be stressed out about working for my company. But I also want to run it efficiently where I'm saving money.
Right. And before John puts a bow on this, I agree. And when you're thinking about picking a payroll solution, what I want if the listeners to think about, because if you're listening to this, you might be an employee and you might be frustrated with what your employer is doing with that process. It goes beyond the payroll, like Will said. So if you're listening to this and think about the other factors and think about making sure that you have a solution that can help you with the workers' compensation, that can help you with employee benefits and HR and term life insurance, and because you don't want to outgrow a system. You want something that you can grow with. So those are some of the things that you need to consider when picking a payroll. Don't be intimidated by payroll processing. We've taken a lot of time here at Teaching Tax Law to bring in the best of the best as far as what we call implementation partners and resources for you. And Yeah, we've been real happy, and I would encourage you to, as someone that went with a modern solution that we outgrew once already, as a business owner, think about that, and think about if you fit into one of those avatars that I discussed as far as maybe, doing some more tax planning. So,
and Will, before we let you off the hook here, I know you guys kind of answered this just in conversation, but and I know Gusto as a whole, I mean, you guys do a great job with just, paying contractors, W-2 employees. You guys do a lot, which is incredible. But let's take a really, really simple, but possibly a complex scenario, right? And say somebody, I'm just gonna pull this one out of thin air. Say I'm a real estate agent. I got a team of 3 people, myself included, and I just, Venmo them or do something here, kind of ad hoc. I got some office teams. So what would be your response to that? And feel free to get salesy if you want to, because you guys actually have a good product. So we'll let you on that one. But how would you describe to them? Say, you know what, that's great. You got what you got, but this is a better way, whether it was with Gusto or somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. So my advice would be, first work with teaching tax flow, because you need to consider whether or not those individuals you're paying are actually employees or contractors, and that's very important. So you really got to classify them correctly, or else you're going to get yourself in trouble. And then secondly, what is the opportunity tax-wise to make sure that you're actually taking advantage of your real estate business? And, how do you maximize you saving the most amount of money, giving Uncle Sam exactly what he's due, not what he wants. And so that's the first point. And that's why Gus partners with accounting firms nationwide. We partner with over 14,000 accounting firms nationwide, because I believe that the advisors are the advisors and Gusto plays its role. And so once you've kind of gone through and identified things and are saving taxes, then you can turn on Gusto to make sure your team members, whether they are going to stay contractors or not, or employees or not, are taken care of, or paid on time, that the compliance around all of that, both federally, state, in your city, municipal, are all automated and taken care of. Running a business is a lot of work and a lot of administrative duty. And so especially when you have a team, especially when you're taking advantage of tax strategies like an S-corp. So Gusto really helps you onboard new employees, onboard new contractors. They get these beautifully designed portals. They really feel a part of the team. As you continue to grow, you get to provide, low cost, no cost, premium benefits to that team. So that way they stick with you. So that way retention is big right now. There's 1.6 jobs for every unemployed person right now. Anybody can leave a company and find another job. So if you have some incredible team members that you don't want to lose, you're going to have to do a lot more than just pay them. And proof is in the pudding there. So compensation is only a small piece of somebody's consideration of staying at your company. So I would approach it like that. It's, in my opinion, it's a multifaceted attack. First, let's make sure you're taking care of your team and you're in the right spot legally, and then execute on taking care of your team and yourself through Gusto.
If that's not a mic drop moment for describing the importance of payroll, I don't know what is, man.
Payroll's a part of a broader ecosystem of advice, right? And so that's how I would approach that scenario.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, thank you as always for joining us here on your own show. And well, we appreciate the time. I know you guys are extremely busy and always are, just obviously improving the whole world of payroll. So we appreciate your input and your time on the show. Awesome, guys. Well, we will see everybody here again. However, I just wrote down an acronym that I think I'm going to use somewhere. Maybe this is it. Instead of, ASAP for as soon as possible, I think teaching tax flow and Gusto still, it's a good marriage in a sense, because we try to accomplish the same thing and we're keeping it as simple as possible in a complex situation. So
like TTFG, is that like teaching tax flow Gusto?
Ooh,
okay.
I like that.
Here we go.
I can tell you're a marketing guy. See, CPA gone marketer. I like it. I can appreciate that. We need to get you a T-shirt that just says that, and then let you out. We'll let you and Chris out in the wild. But excellent show, you guys. Thank you so much for the insight. As always, we will put the link directly in the show notes, so you as the listeners have no excuse for not checking out everything that Gusto is about. And by the way, also for everybody that's listening to this, Will's plug on TTF was completely unsolicited, so he was not paid at all.
That is right. That's right. It was unsolicited. So
Just as Starbucks gift cards, which I will mail to you.
that's right. I was going to say I appreciate the check that's coming in the mail, John. So thank you.
Well, hey, I know who can process it. So on that note, everybody, thank you again for joining us here on the Teaching Tax Flow podcast. We will see you back here again, same time, same place next week, but different topic. Thanks for hanging out with us, as always, here on the podcast. John Trapolsky here from the TTF team, still with you. And thank you for hanging out with us today. So, although a little bit longer than usual on this episode, obviously thank you, Will and Chris, for joining us on this topic. And for anybody that was listening to this, you probably, I don't know, I'm going to take a guess, you probably weren't too excited about talking payroll because it's probably a hassle to you. So, one of the things I really want to highlight that we touched on early in this episode, and probably a couple times in the middle and a little bit towards the end too, is whether it's Gusto or whoever you go with for a payroll provider solution, we'll call it, really look at it as something that's an extension of your business, an extension of your culture, just not something that's so transactional, right? Sure, it's an expectation, obviously, from any employee that they're going to get paid, but it's the little things that count. In this case, exactly, it's a huge thing going above and beyond, making it, just easier, a little bit more reliable for yourself, but then also for your team as you hopefully are growing. So, as mentioned, as always, we are popping in some resources in the show notes of this, as well as a direct link to check out Gusto. And honestly, we look forward to working with these guys more. I think they're a great fit. Obviously, for teaching tax flow, we have very, very similar interests in mind, obviously making things less complex, aka easier than expected. So join us here next week. We got another great topic coming up, actually a whole roster of great topics here. I'm looking at our schedule as I'm reading this, probably for the next 3 months. Actually, we got some really good stuff. So we will talk to everybody very soon.
The content provided is for educational purposes only. We encourage you to seek personalized investment advice from your financial professional. For all tax and legal advice, please consult your CPA or attorney. Investment advisory services are offered through Cabin Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cabin Securities, a registered broker-dealer. The content of this podcast does not constitute an offer of securities. Offerings can only be made through an offering memorandum, and you should carefully examine the risk factors and other information contained in the memorandum.